Welcome to Vitality Made Simple, the podcast that empowers you to feel better, look better, and to enjoy better relationships. You know, life is all about relationships. And it's a pleasure today to have Dr. Emeran Mayer. He is someone I highly respect. I've read his books. I actually used up 2 highlighters on his last book, which is called The Gut Immune Connection. Dr. Mayer is quite unique in what he does because he is a gastroenterologist. He's a neuroscientist. He's a distinguished research professor in the Department of Medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He's executive director of the Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress. So, you know, that's what we're all faced with. And this is just going to be so relevant to every single person listening. He has published 415 scientific papers. I think I only have about 400 of those in my reference library, Dr. Mayer. I love your papers. And he's co-edited 3 books. His books are The Mind-Gut Connection in 2016 and The Gut Immune Connection in June of 2021. And then the recipe book, Interconnected Plates, in 2023. Now, I did not know about that, but I was going to harass you, Dr. Mayer, and say, when are you publishing a recipe book? Because I love your recipes that are in your existing books and on your Instagram. So welcome to Vitality Made Simple.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you.
Well, it's just a thrill to have you because I so appreciate your research. And I'm very curious, tell us how your medical education led you to the path of, you know, researcher as well as clinician and looking for root cause problems in the gastrointestinal system. How in the heck did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, to give you the short version of this, I mean, I've always in college had a strong interest in psychology and psychiatry and Jung and Freud and all these you know, classic authors at the time, and not sure why, because I was fortunate, didn't really have any own psychological or medical problems, and so medicine was not my first choice. You know, I ended up there because my grades were so good that everybody was saying, well, why don't you go to medical school? You know, and so that's what got me into medical school. But from the beginning, I was always interested in this connection between the brain, the mind, and the body from day one. And both in terms of, you know, my original plan to go into psychiatry and also to look for my dissertation thesis. So this was all at the University of Munich. And there, you know, in order to get your MD title, you had 2 options. One is to write a token review paper or to do a formal thesis, like a PhD-like thesis. So I spent 4 years in the Institute of Physiology in Munich and started brain-heart interactions experimentally. And so that fascinated me. And, you know, somehow I had a clinical experience, a clinical rotation at the Mass General Hospital, and this was in gastroenterology, and that convinced me that gastroenterology is more interesting than cardiology at the time. You know, it was the main thing in cardiology was cardiac bypass surgeries, and gastroenterology was the new age of endoscopy and a lot of exciting things happening there. So, but again, you know, once I did my gastroenterology fellowship, my interest was again primarily in this interaction between the nervous system and the brain. And I had a mentor who was very supportive. So, you know, this was the era where these gut peptides or neuropeptides were first discovered. So now everybody, it's common knowledge now, but at the time it was kind of a revolution that you would find the same neurotransmitters in the gut that you found in the brain. And so I've stuck with that theme all the way through. I could say this started really before medical school. The clinical part I mean, I always loved the clinical part of medicine, I have to say, and it's been ongoing back and forth between how much clinical, how much research do I do. And it oscillated throughout my career. Sometimes I did 80% research and some depending on grant funding, and sometimes I did 80% clinical. And so that really explains where I am today. It's
Well, you're quite a pioneer to start that long ago, because now leaky gut is, a hot topic in medicine, and of course, increased intestinal permeability is the correct term. So simplify for our listeners, what leaky gut is and how it impacts the brain. But Dr. Mayer, also tell us, how did you get to the United States? How did that all happen?
I have to give you the short version. So when I was 18, somehow I heard about this organization, the American Field Service, or AFS, and there was a local representative in my hometown whom I got to know. And once I heard about this, I decided this, and you had to apply for it. There was kind of a competition and a selection process. At some point, even the principal of the high school I ended up with in Pomona, California, came to visit my family. And I mean, they did an amazing job in making sure that you're the right person for this year abroad, and at age 18. And interestingly, the match wasn't that good, because I ended up with a family that, this was the time of like the Vietnam War and student demonstrations, and I was heavily involved in this whole student movement in Germany at the time, and then coming to a U.S. High school at the time, where there was really no interest. I mean, it was the college students who were interested in the protests against the Vietnam War, but in high school it was only, it was football games and school dances and cars, particularly in a place like Pomona,
Right.
outside of LA, total car culture. And I thought I landed on the moon, really. It's and my family thought, wonderful family. I mean, my adoptive or foster mom, this was almost the case, it was absolutely wonderful, had a big influence on my psychological well-being. And but they thought that I'm a socialist, and I always tried to explain to them it's not about socialism, it's about totally different agenda. And so anyway, it was a great year, and it taught me to adapt to a different lifestyle, a different philosophy, which was a really good exercise. So, I was able to live with a family, very conservative, and we had a great time together.
That is fascinating. I so admire your bravery and adventurous spirit. Well, and your adventurous spirit has carried over to all your research into leaky gut and how that affects the brain and the immune system. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the leaky gut, I mean, it's interesting how this has become popular with the whole microbiome science, and this phenomenon that happened when the first papers came out on these microbiome findings in mice, 99% in mice, how this was picked up by the lay press and the media, and I've never seen something like this in my career, but because the brain gut was never of great interest to the media. But once you added the microbes, that just completely changed the picture. And so, and with the leaky gut, I mean, in my clinic, the first patients that came with that word, that expression, I didn't take it serious. It's the first time I sort of encountered the field of functional medicine, and I was a huge skeptic of anything that came from that direction. This kind of, a lot of pseudoscience or marginally supported science came that way, and it was popular. It's popular with patients. So And then the misconception, the leaky gut, that you have holes in your intestine and all the microbes go into your circulation. Well, that would be sepsis, obviously, which is not happening. It's a very different thing. So fast forward, the way we understand that today is, as you mentioned, the increased intestinal permeability is clearly a fundamental part now of how we conceptualize chronic disease and chronic immune activation. And I should expand it. I mean, this communication between the brain, the gut, and the microbes, it's not open borders. Like people have this idea that everything that happens in the gut directly can go to the brain. It's a very tightly regulated communication system with two border controls, I would say. One is in the brain, the blood-brain barrier, and the other one is the gut immune barrier. And both of them are regulated by the microbes. I mean, by other factors as well, by anxiety, stress, and but to a significant degree by the microbes. And again, that has been shown in animal and mouse experiments. It's difficult to show this in humans if it happens to the same degree. But I think you have to put that concept of leaky gut in the context of this larger concept. There's if anything that happens in the gut would just flow to the brain, an open border concept or a globalization analogy, that's we would be dead. We, like all of us, would have meningitis and acute brain inflammation. So it's very tightly regulated. And coming back to the gut part, it's not necessary that you have holes in in the lining of your gut. There are this cell type, these immune cells, the dendritic cells that have these. So, I mean, first of all, I should say 70% of our immune system is in the gut. Just microns away from the microbes, which is an amazing engineering feat of evolution to do something like this. So these dendritic cells, they have these extensions that go through the lining of the gut into the mucus layer of the gut. So they're basically surrounded by mucus. As long as you have an intact mucus barrier, the microbes will not come into contact with these sentinel cells. But if they do, these cells don't know if the contact comes with a dangerous microbe or with a commensal, with one that's just living in our gut. It just recognizes membrane components like lipopolysaccharide or other substances they called MAMPs. And the immune cell has receptors, these toll-like receptors. And when a contact is made between these microbial components in the membrane and these receptors on the microbes, the immune cells ring the alarm bell. They think there's something, a microbe should not come close to the immune system. So they ring the alarm bell and produce cytokines, initially locally and proteins fairly small amounts. And these cytokines can lead to a low-grade immune activation of the gut. And again, that's the big difference, not the inflammation we see in inflammatory bowel disease, which is a much more severe fulminant inflammation. But if this persists or gets worse, then two things can happen. So the dendritic cells are also able to migrate. They can get into the bloodstream and migrate to other organs like the liver, and then take this inflammation with them. Or microbe components, mainly from gram-negative microbes, can actually get into the systemic circulation. And for that, it's necessary that the other part of the intestinal barrier. So the one is the mucus layer, which is the first encounter, The second one is the lining of the gut. So you have this double barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And once that epithelial cell layer becomes leaky, membrane components, doesn't even have to be the whole microbe, the components of the membrane can pass through and then again get in contact with this innate immune system, that dendritic cells, and trigger this whole sequence of event. And in the worst case, then you have microbes, micro components getting close to the gut-associated immune system, and then that can spill over into the systemic circulation and cause a systemic low-grade inflammation. It's been called metabolic endotoxemia. I mean, endotoxemia is basically when you have an infection and it reaches your blood and becomes a life-threatening situation, as you know. It's not like that. I mean, a lot of people have that metabolic endotoxemia, not infectious, but metabolic. And, they live happily with it. They don't notice it. They don't have fever. So all the reactions that we know from sepsis or metabolic or a infectious endotoxemia are not there. So it's a very different situation. It's our immune system has this repertoire from this low-grade immune activation all the way to fulminant, widespread sepsis. And this low-grade inflammation is really the mildest form, but with a lot of consequences downstream.
Right. That it's that chronic inflammatory problem that's leading to all these lifestyle diseases that we're seeing today that you talked so well about in your book. It seems like, Dr. Mayer, it's sort of a rain barrel effect. What I see in my profession from the oral microbiome and how it increases chronic inflammatory cytokines and just the inflammatory load, like, as you said, our immune systems can handle it for quite a while, but then pretty soon the rain barrel can get full. One of my favorite lines from your book was that if you don't give those beneficial microbes what they want in your gut, then they're going to eat that mucus layer. So expound on this and tell us how we better nourish those beneficial microbes so that the mucus layer can stay intact.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting question because, our gut microbiome, that's the general knowledge, and which is largely correct, lives in full symbiosis with us, with the host. So there's some kind of an agreement that these trillions of microbes will not cause disease and will, if anything, benefit our own health. But there's some exceptions to that. So for example, if we try to kill them with antibiotics, then they develop resistance to the antibiotics. So they basically learn, and which ultimately hurts us. So there's clearly a limit to the symbiosis. Another one, with the mucus layer. So that took me a long time to sort of find out the reason. Why would microbes like the Akkermansia, which is always sort of portrayed as a very health-promoting organism, and these group of bacteria normally live off the complex carbohydrates like others, break them down into metabolites, including anti-inflammatory metabolites. Why would such a beneficial type of microbe actually in the case of before they starve, they would actually feed on our own protective layer? And for a long time, people that work in this area could not give me a good explanation. But I think what it seems like, they can break down these complex sugar molecules that make up the mucus layer, this mucin, but at the same time stimulate the production or stimulate the goblet cells in the colon that produce the mucus layer or in intestine in general. So they basically increase the turnover. They stimulate the production of these molecules that make up the healthy protective mucus layer, but at the same time they feed on it, and that seems to have a beneficial effect on our gut health. And in inflammatory bowel disease, and there are attempts to create this second generation probiotics, for example, with Akkermansia. I mean, there's a couple of products on the market with some evidence to support their effectiveness, but this can only happen if at the same time they don't just feed on it, but they also assure that enough mucus is being produced both for their own consumption and for the protection.
Well, and when I only thought that Akkermansia muciniphila was just a great bacteria, I had a patient who had crazy high Akkermansia via the GI map. And so, after researching it more, learned that indeed it was probably feeding on her gut lining because she was on a super low carb diet and not giving those beneficial bacteria enough prebiotic foods. Correct? Is that in line with what you see?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's individual differences, so probably most Akkermansia, I mean, there's several strains and subspecies of Akkermansia. It's not just one. Kind of interesting to me that has not been discussed more. People always talk about Akkermansia, but not just like E. coli. There's good ones and bad ones, and it's probably a common property of these cells that they feed on the mucus, but there may be a difference as how much they stimulate the production, and so if they don't sufficiently stimulate production, then there would be actually a negative health effect.
Yeah, in this particular patient, she had high zonulin, which would indicate that she did have some intestinal permeability, increased intestinal permeability. And I so appreciate how you said you didn't appreciate leaky gut, the term leaky gut. When I first started my functional medicine education, probably 10 years ago, they said, do not use the term leaky gut. That just sounds, like the news, like the media. So increased intestinal permeability is the correct term. Well, Dr. Mayer, stress is just so normal in our society, and everybody listening probably feels like they have more stress than they want. You did such a beautiful job of addressing stress as part of the gut immune equation. So tell us all how chronic stress impacts this gut permeability, this increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut, and then how that in turn relates to our brains, neurologic disorders.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about stress, we have to sort of differentiate. There's different types of stress. I mean, stress is a general perturbation of the balance in our bodies, and particularly in our brain-gut microbiome interaction. I think that's the best, way of saying this, because most people talk about stress. They say, yeah, we're all stressed. It doesn't, I'm just as stressed as my, so I hear this a lot from patients. So everybody's stressed, the rest of my family is stressed, but only I have the GI problem. So it can't be the stress, So there's acute stress and there's chronic stress. And with acute stress, obviously the system that we have to respond to acute stress, this acute perturbation of the balance is very adaptive. It means it has saved, millions of human lives. And it's probably the reason why the human species is still on this planet, that we have a very effective stress response with the sympathetic nervous system and the HPA axis, and depending on the severity of stress, it can't just be, the sympathetic system, but if it gets more severe, the HPA axis kicks in. And so that's not the stress that we're talking about, and that amount of stress has probably not changed that much, I would say. And, in our past, it was the threat by a wild animal that was chasing us. And, we had this option, fight or flight response. What has happened is the chronic form of stress has increased, exponentially and keeps increasing. And that has led to a phenomenon that the stress response is constantly turned on in a low grades, like an idling car. It's never turned off. And, this has also been referred to allostatic load. So it becomes counterproductive, counter-adaptive. It causes damage to many tissues in the body. You can trace it all the way down to the telomere shortening rate that is faster under this allostatic load. And that's really the main problem that we have in our society. It's this constant worry, and the internet certainly contributed tremendously to it, because now we're stressed by things we didn't even know about before that are going on 24 hours a day. And it's a lot of things we can't do anything about anyway, but it upsets us, it stresses us. So there's no fight or flight response possible to that kind of stress exposure. And so, there's this chronic elevation of, so we've done, and we're still doing studies on this to characterize this. If you have that low-grade stress response turned on, you're more likely, for example, to develop irritable bowel syndrome, or more likely to develop flares if you have inflammatory bowel disease. You have more flares if that if that system is chronically turned on. So, the question is, what can we do about it? It's I always compare it with the chronic, so this allostatic load, this chronic mental stress, and at the same time, this chronic dietary stress our bodies are exposed to by getting a diet that does not contain the things that would decrease inflammation, would have anti-inflammatory effects like IL-10 production, or increased mucus production, or having anti-inflammatory effects on the gut-associated immune cells. So in some ways, we have both of these things turned on at the same time, and that's kind of the real. It is a scary situation, It's something that it's sort of like climate change, because so a lot of people feel, there are these big events, and then everybody, in the news for a few days, you see these horrendous images of flooding, but then a lot of people go back home and say, oh, I can just continue the way I live. It's not going to affect me personally. It happens in Africa. It happens in, if you live in these dangerous areas, it's different. It's like the warming of the oceans. Who is directly affected by this on a daily basis? And it's kind of similar with these chronic stressors. We don't feel we're affected chronically by these stresses going on and increasing, because what we do, we just go to our primary care physician and get a new medication for blood pressure, or for cholesterol, or now for obesity. And so we kind of normalize it, but the fact that the consumption of all these drugs keeps going up, and we add new drugs to it that are being celebrated as major breakthroughs, there are indications of what's going on with these chronic, two-pronged stressors we're exposed to.
Exactly. And I'm sure you've noticed in your clinical practice, like me, younger and younger people are getting sicker and sicker. That's really what sent me back to school, Dr. Mayer, for functional medicine training. I started noticing um, not only the list of meds getting longer for younger people, but I also started noticing a lot more um, periodontal disease. I mean, it was just really interesting. And of course, that's got a lot of different causes. It can be nutrition. It's not just one thing, like everything else. We try to silo everything, but as you said so well in your book, it's this whole organism, and everything's coming in, and everybody's a little bit different in terms of what weighs the heaviest in their immune system. But as you were saying, it's not just our food. It's not just our level of activity. It's not just our stress. It's not just our sleep disruption. It's everything. And these are not old people diseases anymore. Used to be, well, people used to explain this by saying, well, these diseases are increasing because people are living longer and we don't have these acute infectious diseases that are killing us at younger ages. But it's more than that. Just like you said, it's it's the basic nutritional status of young people that makes them vulnerable.
And also amongst young people, I mean, their stress level has gone up tremendously. As you know, the rate of the prevalence of anxiety amongst young people during the pandemic has gone up. There's this insane competition. I mean, I see it at UCLA, all these applications, this insane competition to get into universities. And I've also heard this in Hong Kong, for example, the increasing suicide rate, because so the pressure on young people is, and they know the competition that they're going to be facing, not just getting into the schools, but when they come out, now there's artificial intelligence competing for jobs. It's very different from like when I grew up. I mean, not there was anything good about of World War II, but after World War II, the feeling was that this is a new world beginning. There were job openings everywhere, and it was mainly a positive attitude for the future. And that has changed. I think a lot of people are worried about the future now. And
so. That's a really good point, because I went to school in the early 80s, and I think you in your book said you were in medical school in the 70s. But it was all hopeful for us. We could go out and start a practice. I started a tiny little dental practice, just opened up one day. Well, people can't do that anymore. Even with the medical practice, it's changed so much. That's really a great point. Another thing in your book that I thought was really on target. I mean, the whole book was on target, but I loved how you said that we're always looking for this ideal state for the microbiome, as if once we achieve health, then we're going to have this, gut brain utopia and be healthy forever. We so tend to look for the magic potion that solves all our problems and then we're done. But that is not the way our bodies work. And so expound on that. You use the word vitality all through your book, and you give so many people so many examples of people who have achieved vitality by not thinking there's one thing, by making it into a lifestyle. So what is your lifestyle? You are obviously living with vitality. You and your wife travel and write and create and are doing all these things. I gave such a short list on your introduction. You're doing so much. So tell us what vitality looks like for you and how you keep that going in your life.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, and I often think about this, particularly if you get to an age where a lot of my friends are retiring, and unfortunately some of them have passed away with many unhealthy lifestyles, and so and I compare myself and what's different in my life. And I mean, I have abused my body or my whole, organism in my early part of my career with being obsessed with the career goals and making it to the top, and spending more time on airplanes and eating um, um, airport lounge food, and extremely unhealthy. Overdose of coffee during the day, then calming down with wine. It was, when I look back, it's just really scary. But what was present all of this time was this passion and this excitement, for, I mean, not just for writing papers. I mean, I had this passion for, for mountain expeditions and the outdoors. And so there's a lot of areas. And now that I've somewhat slowed down with one part of my academic career, and in terms of applying for grants, which in some ways lost its meaning for me, to battle study sections for 2 or 3 years. That just no longer made sense. When you realize that you have a limited amount of time in your life, do you want to spend it that way? Or and so it was easy for me, because I had these other interests, like promoting the health message to the lay public through social media, through a newsletter, through the books. I mean, writing the books has made a big difference. It was painful in the beginning. You had to change your writing style, and the interactions with the editors was terrible, being criticized, and but now I'm extremely excited. It created a new passion for me that equals really the scientific passion that I've had throughout my life. And the transition was hard because I was doing both things at the same time, until I realized I can't do it. This is going to have a negative effect on my health. And so I've slowed down what I've done up to this point. I wouldn't stop it, because another passion is teaching students. I mean, there's like the things that I do are generally done because I'm passionate about it. It's not, and I've been lucky. I mean, being in medicine, like, you're never poor, really. So you don't. So I grew up in a way. I picked medical school and did everything in my career, not for the money, but for the passion. Believe it or not, if I didn't have my wife, who has reminded me many times, there's also other things to think about. I would probably still continue to do the same way, but I think this, and then I've looked around amongst my friends who has that passion, and this vitality, and just met somebody recently again who's now in his early 80s. This man is passionate about what he does. He's closed his practice, but now he's into the outdoors, and he's taking courses in physics, and when you sit down with him, he just radiates with energy. It's so this, I think, is a big part, maybe as important as all the other bodily things that we talk about also. So sometimes people suspect that I'm somebody who recommends the diet is the whole story. It's not. It's definitely not.
No, you make that really clear in your book. Thank you for that.
It's an important one, but it's not the only one.
It's not, and I really think, Dr. Mayer, that it may be having a purpose in life and getting up every day and thinking, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this, is such a boost for the immune system. It would probably be really hard to study, but I see it in my clinical practice. The people that have that vitality-based mindset, I think their nutrients work better in their gut than people who are stressed out. It's the rest and digest versus running from that tiger. When you're running from the tiger, you're not going to be assimilating those nutrients like somebody who's having fun and teaching. And I know you all are traveling and creating. it's a really component we forget a lot.
Yeah, people forget this. And, there is research on this, actually with a direct effect on the immune system, this attitude called eudaimonia, for happiness, that which has to do with meaning in life and doing something, for others, not just for yourself, and not just for increasing your bank account and buying a bigger house. I mean, the society in the US obviously is far away from this. I mean, there are many exceptions, but the dogma of our society is really to go the other way, to maximize income, size of houses, size of cars.
Yeah.
That's kind of the dogma, for most people. That's what happiness is. And a place like LA, you see this particularly strong. It's this obsession with, and yeah. So I think what you mentioned, I totally agree. And there's studies. Friend and colleague of mine, Steve Cole at UCLA, is a professor.
I've read his papers. Steve Cole, yeah.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy.
Yeah.
And so he studied this eudaimonia and the effect on gene expression of immune cells from so-called PBMCs, peripheral mononuclear cells. And they compared, people that were after the material happiness and the eudaimonic happiness. And you could see it all the way to the gene expression of immune cells that and then, I mean, again, going downstream from there, recently talked to Elisa Epel from UCSF, another very interesting person, positive psychology, and she's written this bestseller or co-written this best-selling book on telomere shortening, and all these things go all the way down from what goes on in your mind, to your immune cells, to the genes, so. And for the first time now, in this decade, I mean, we have all the scientific points to prove it. Before it was speculation. Greek philosophers knew this. I don't know how they found out about it, or the Chinese traditional medicine people knew it, but today we can prove it scientifically. So it's very exciting.
It's very exciting. I mean, I always say money never made anybody rich. And, that is the truth. It's never money that it's true riches in life. It's just been a treasure to have time with you. I know you've got a big meeting coming up. And I thank you for joining me. Tell our listeners how they can reach you. Listeners, please join him on Instagram. It's going to make you hungry. Your mouth is going to water. Your taste buds are going to get perked up. The best recipes. And also this book, Dr. Mayer, has fantastic recipes. I always outline them for the weekend. Just thank you for that. I just wish, we all lived closer. I've enjoyed getting to know your wife and helping me get this organized. Tell her thank you from me. How can people find you and learn more?
Probably the best way. Oh, and by the way, it was really enjoyable talking to you. I think it's you also seem to be a person with a lot of vitality and passion. I'm sure you take the same thing into your practice, which patients love, obviously, as well. So the easiest way is to go to my website, which we are just in the process of updating. In a couple of weeks will be up, emeranmayer.com. And from there, you can access all the things you can do. You can sign up for the weekly newsletter, which I would highly recommend.
Yes, me too.
Go to Instagram, Facebook, and this recipe library. So I would strongly recommend for people to do that. And also on this website, you're going to be able shortly, I would say within 4 weeks, to order the interconnected plate recipe book. So
I'm at the top of the list, folks. Can't wait. Thank you. That is fantastic. I did not know about that until I talked to Minu, and And I was gonna harass you today about that. That was like one thing I have to do.
Thank you so much again. It was wonderful, and
Uh,
hopefully
thank you.
our
Thank
paths
you.
will cross
We could have
again.
talked for hours. I had all these ideas, but I really respect that you've got something else to do. And thank you so much for joining me. I This is wonderful information. I hope everyone will read your book. I've been telling everybody about it. I'm in Oklahoma, so we I say, in Oklahoma, the 60s got to us in the 70s, but we are catching up. So thank you again. And if you have anything else you want to talk about at some point, just give me an email, and I'd love to have you. You're delightful.
Absolutely, we can continue this conversation, in a few months from now. So I'm sure interesting things will be happening. Oh, I should also remind your listeners and viewers. Um, so we filmed this documentary for PBS, which will be shown, I think, right after Thanksgiving on nationwide on PBS, and also finished recording a masterclass, masterclass.com, which is in combination with a couple husband-wife investigative team at Stanford, UCLA, in San Francisco, and it's all about the topics we talked about today. So there's experts in food and the microbiome, and I contributed the mind-gut connection to this topic. So this will also come out in the next month. So there's a lot of exciting things happening.
Is that the Sonnenbergs? The
Yeah, the Sonnenbergs,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be great. Great, great, great. We'll look forward to that. Well, thank you, Dr. Mayer. I was pronouncing your name incorrectly, and I apologize for that. But thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Check out all these books. I'll have all the links in the show notes. Vitality Made Simple is now in 103 countries. We picked up a country and over 2,800 cities, and that's because all of you wonderful listeners have shared and subscribed. I have been a social media loser until May 11th, and I'm newly on Instagram now. So join me there and join Dr. Mayer there. So blessings until next time.